15 minutes. That's how long my husband gave me before everything he stole from me would turn to ash in his hands. He stood at the head of the conference table in the restaurant we built together, smiling the way he used to smile at me on Sunday mornings, and said, "Congratulations, sweetheart. You're terminated, effective immediately. Olivia will be taking over as executive chef. The divorce papers will be at your sister's place by tomorrow evening. Please remove your knives and leave the building." I remember the silence after, the kind of silence that feels like someone pressed mute on the world. 23 of my staff stood frozen in the dining room, sauté pans still hissing on the line. My sous chef Manny had his mouth open like he was waiting to be told it was a joke. The pastry kid, Camila, was crying already and she didn't even fully understand what was happening. The only person not surprised was the woman standing behind my husband in the chef, whites she had no business wearing. Olivia, 26, blonde extensions, food blogger turned consultant, now apparently my replacement. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I didn't do any of the things he had clearly prepared a script for. I just looked at him. This man I'd married 14 years ago in a backyard in Connecticut, and I said, "Okay, Brent." That was it. Okay. Then I walked back to my office, packed my Wusthof roll into my canvas knife bag, took my grandmother's old copper saucepan off the shelf, and walked out the front door of Maren & Co., the restaurant named for me, the restaurant that had earned its second Michelin star 11 months earlier, the restaurant valued at $12 million in the Forbes 30 Under 40 piece they ran on Brent 2 summers ago. And I got in my Subaru and I drove. I didn't drive home. I didn't have a home anymore, not really. He'd already moved her into the brownstone in Park Slope. I'd seen her toothbrush on a Wednesday morning in November and pretended I hadn't. I drove to the parking garage on Atlantic Avenue, the one with the slow ramp, and I sat in level B3 with the engine off and watched the clock on my dashboard tick past 7:14 p.m. In 15 minutes, every supplier contract Maren & Co. depended on would simultaneously revert to my name, personally, because I was the one who'd signed them, every single one, 4 years earlier when Brent was too busy raising capital to deal with farmers. In 15 minutes, every recipe in the proprietary digital menu system, the one Brent had bragged about to investors, the one that controlled portion costs, plating photos, allergen flags, wine pairings, and the kitchen's entire prep schedule, would lock behind a credential only I had. And in 15 minutes, the Michelin inspection notification I'd been quietly forwarding to my own personal email for 3 years would stop forwarding to the restaurant's master inbox, which meant the next inspector who walked through that door would do so completely unannounced, with a kitchen run by a woman who had never plated a tasting menu in her life. I watched the clock hit 7:29, I smiled, then I turned the key and I drove slowly up the ramp, and I went to a diner in Bay Ridge, and I ordered eggs over easy and rye toast, and I ate every bite. To understand how I got there, sitting in a parking garage at 39 years old eating diner eggs while my husband's empire began to quietly hemorrhage, I have to go back 12 years to a basement apartment in Astoria with a stove that only had 2 working burners. I met Brent in culinary school. He was the kid in the front row asking the instructor about food cost percentages, while the rest of us were just trying not to slice off our thumbs. I was the kid in the back row from a town in upstate New York, where my mother ran a diner, and my grandmother had taught me to make pierogi the same week I learned to ride a bike. He had a finance degree from Wharton he'd walked away from. I had $3,000 in savings and a knife roll my dad bought me as a graduation present from a community college I'd attended at night. We fell in love over a shared shift at a brasserie in the West Village. He'd come back to expedite even though he was technically front of house. I liked that he wasn't afraid of the heat. He liked that I could plate 70 covers without breaking a sweat. We got married in my aunt's backyard in Stamford, 84 people. My cousin Davy played guitar. My mother cried into her napkin during the toast. The restaurant was my idea, my recipes, my techniques. The dehydrated tomato powder we used on the burrata course, that was a method I developed during a stage in Modena. The pomegranate molasses we drizzled over the lamb, that came from my grandmother, who came from a village outside Krakow before she came from a village outside Aleppo, before she came to Brooklyn. And yes, my family is complicated, and yes, that's where the menu got its weird, beautiful soul. Brent's contribution was the business, and he was good at it, I'll give him that. He found the space on Smith Street when nobody was looking at Smith Street. He raised the seed round. He put together the LLC. He hired the publicist who got us in Bon Appetit before we'd even opened. I trusted him with all of it because I trusted him with everything. I was 27 years old and I was in love, and I was so tired from working doubles that when he handed me papers to sign, I signed them. Here's the thing nobody tells you about being a working chef married to your business partner. The kitchen swallows you. You're there at 6 a.m. for the bread bake. You're there at 1 a.m. breaking down the line. You miss your sister's baby shower. You miss your mother's birthday. You miss your own anniversary because the walk-in went down on a Saturday, and you spent 11 hours moving $40,000 of product to a friend's restaurant 6 blocks away. And while you're doing that, your husband is in meetings. Your husband is at conferences. Your husband is on a panel in Aspen called The New American Restaurateur, wearing a blazer you didn't pick out, with a woman in the front row wearing a name tag that says Olivia Pratt, Food and Lifestyle. And your husband is laughing at something she said, and you're at home in sweatpants peeling a sweet potato over the sink because you haven't eaten anything but staff meal in 3 days, and you want something your mother would make. I knew about her in March. I didn't know, but I knew. The way wives know. She started showing up at the restaurant on Tuesdays. Brent invited me to taste the new menu. Her hand on his forearm at the chef's counter. The way he stopped using my name in front of investors and started saying, the team developed this dish, the team sourced this fish, when he meant me, only me, always me. The way he started taking calls in the office with the door closed when before he'd taken them at the bar. Then in April he hired her as a creative consultant, $12,000 a month for what exactly? She came in 3 afternoons a week and stood in my kitchen in heels, asking my line cooks questions like, what's the story behind this dish, and how does this make you feel, while they were in the middle of butchering a 140-pound pig. I asked Brent about it once, in our kitchen at home, on a Sunday morning that felt like Sunday mornings used to feel. He said, Maren, you're being paranoid. She's helping us with brand voice. You don't understand brand voice. That's not your area. That's not your area. I want you to remember that phrase. That's not your area. He said it to me 4 times across the spring. Once about the brand voice. Once when I asked why I wasn't on the email thread with our investors. Once when I noticed Olivia had been quietly added as a signer on our PR vendor agreements. And once, the week before he fired me, when I said I wanted to attend the meeting with the Michelin people about the upcoming guide cycle. That's not your area, Maren. Just focus on the food. So I focused on the food. I focused on the food the way a woman focuses on something when she suspects she's losing everything else. I rebuilt the tasting menu in May. I sourced a new heritage pork program from a farm in the Hudson Valley I'd been courting for 2 years. I trained Manny up so hard he could run service in his sleep, and I started, very quietly, very carefully, doing something else. I started reading our contracts, all of them, every single one. I sat in the back office at 3 a.m. after service with a cup of coffee, and I read every contract our restaurant had ever signed, the supplier contracts, the lease, the intellectual property assignments, the licensing for our recipe management software. And what I found was this: in the rush of opening, in the mess of those first 18 months, in all the sleepless nights when Brent was in meetings and I was holding the kitchen together with bobby pins and stubbornness, I was the one who had signed every single operational document. The lease for our supplier warehouse on Van Brunt, signed by me, personally guaranteed by me. The exclusivity agreements with our 7 core farms, signed by me, with my personal name listed as the contracted party because we hadn't formed the LLC yet when I'd negotiated them. The proprietary recipe database we built with a developer in Queens, the IP was assigned to me, not to the company. I paid the developer out of a personal account because we'd been waiting on a wire transfer that month, and Brent had said, "Just put it on your card, we'll square up later." We never squared up. The Michelin liaison email, the official channel for Inspector Communications, was registered to Maren at marenandco.com, an address I'd set up myself because the IT guy was on vacation that week, and I needed it working before service. I read all of this in the back office at 3 a.m., and I sat very still and I understood something. The man I had loved for 12 years was about to make the biggest mistake of his life, and he was going to make it because he believed I was just the cook. I started preparing in mid-May, not for revenge, for survival. Because something in me, something my mother had taught me without knowing she was teaching me, knew what was coming. I quietly transferred the supplier contracts into a new sole proprietorship LLC in my name only, registered in Delaware. I made sure every farmer, every fishmonger, every cheese guy understood that the relationship was with me personally, not with Maren & Co. I took them out to coffee. I asked about their kids. I reminded Hank at the pork farm that I was the one who'd shown up in the rain in February to taste his mangalitsa before he'd ever sold to a Brooklyn restaurant. He squeezed my hand and said, "Maren, anything you ever need." I exported the entire recipe database to a personal cloud drive, backed up and encrypted, 3 copies, one on a hard drive in a safety deposit box at a Chase branch in Cobble Hill. Then I rewrote the access permissions so that anyone trying to log in without my personal credentials after July 14th would get a polite error message saying, "Access suspended due to license termination. Please contact M. Halloran for reinstatement." I had the Michelin email auto-forward to my personal address starting June 1st, and I called my brother-in-law Sean, who's an attorney in White Plains, and I had him build me a divorce file. Preemptive. Quiet. Comprehensive. Sean said, "Maren, are you sure?" I said, "Sean, I haven't been sure of anything in 9 months, but I'm going to be ready." He said, "Okay, we'll be ready." The day he fired me was July 14th, Bastille Day. He hadn't planned it that way, he wasn't that kind of clever. But it was a Tuesday, and Tuesdays were Olivia's day, and I think he'd just decided he was tired of pretending. I'd come in for the 4:30 staff meeting like always, apron tied, hair pulled back, clogs already aching in the right heel because I needed new ones and hadn't had time. Brent was sitting at the chef's counter with Olivia and 2 men in suits I didn't recognize. He stood up when I walked in. Maren. Conference room. Now. I followed him into the private dining room we sometimes used for tasting events. The 2 men in suits followed. Olivia followed. Manny tried to follow, and Brent shut the door in his face. He had a printout in his hand. He read from it. Effective immediately, Maren Halloran is terminated from her position as executive chef and will be removed as a member of the LLC, with her membership interest having been previously diluted to a minority position pursuant to the operating agreement amendment, dated and so on and so on. In that lawyer voice he'd been practicing, while one of the men in suits, I realized later he was a corporate attorney from a firm in Midtown, slid a thick folder across the table toward me. "You'll find this is all in order," he said. I didn't open the folder. I looked at Brent, the man I'd married in my aunt's backyard, the man who'd held my hair back when I had food poisoning from a bad oyster in 2014, the man who'd cried with me when my dad died in 2019, the man who used to bring me coffee on the line when service was so deep I couldn't break. I said, "How long has this been planned?" He said, "Maren, this isn't personal. The investors lost confidence in your leadership. The brand needs a refresh." I said, "How long?" He said, and I'll never forget this because his voice changed, dropped a register, became the voice he uses when he's lying to vendors. 8 months. 8 months. Since November. Since the toothbrush. I nodded. I picked up my knife roll. I picked up my grandmother's saucepan. And on the way out, I stopped in the kitchen and I did the only thing I needed to do. I put my hand on Manny's shoulder and I said, "Whatever happens in the next 48 hours, take care of yourself." Don't go down with this ship. Manny said, Chef, what? I said, you'll see. And then I walked out the front door, and the dishwasher Thomas held the door for me with tears in his eyes because he'd already heard, and I drove to that parking garage on Atlantic Avenue. The first call came at 7:42 p.m. It was Hank from the pork farm. Maren, I just got an email from someone named Olivia Pratt asking me to confirm next week's delivery to a new account at Maren & Co. I don't have a contract with anyone named Olivia Pratt. I have a contract with you. I said, Hank, that's correct. The restaurant doesn't have a supply agreement anymore. I do. If they want pork, they can talk to me. He laughed. He actually laughed. Copy that, chef. The second call came at 8:11 p.m. It was the dairy guy upstate. The third call came at 8:34. The fish purveyor. By 9:15 p.m., my phone had 31 missed calls and my voicemail was full. By 11,084, Brent had called me 47 times. I didn't answer. I went to my sister Bridget's house I drove out to my sister Cassie's place in Westchester, and I slept for 14 hours on her fold-out couch, and when I woke up, the world had moved on without me knowing. Maren & Co. opened for service that next night. 42 reservations. They had no pork. They had no fish. They had no produce except what was in the walk-in. The recipe database was locked. Every line cook trying to pull up a build sheet got that polite error message I'd written 3 weeks earlier. Olivia tried to plate the burrata course from memory, from a photo she'd seen on Instagram, and she sent it out without the dehydrated tomato powder because she didn't know how we made it. The diner who got that plate was a freelancer for Ida. She tweeted a picture with a caption I won't repeat, but which used the word tragic. By the second seating, 3 tables had walked. By the end of the night, 2 of the line cooks had quit, and Manny had texted me one word, damn. The Michelin inspector walked in 3 days later, unannounced. Olivia was at a hot yoga class. I won't tell you the details, but the details were bad. 11 days after I was fired, Maren & Co. lost its second star. 20 days after I was fired, Ida ran the first piece. Inside the quiet implosion of Brooklyn's most high-pret restaurant. It mentioned the supplier issues. It mentioned the menu confusion. It mentioned, in the third-to-last paragraph, that the executive chef who had built the restaurant, me, had been recently let go in a dispute over creative direction, and quoted 3 line cooks anonymously saying I was the only person who had ever known how the kitchen actually worked. 26 days after I was fired, Ita ran the second piece. Maren Halloran's quiet new project. They'd somehow heard about my consulting work, because by that point, I'd been hired by 4 restaurants. The James Beard winner in Tribeca, a new place opening in Red Hook, a hotel group that wanted me to design the F&B for their flagship in Charleston. And this was the one that made me cry in Cassie's kitchen. My mother's old diner, which had nearly closed 3 times in the last decade, and which I'd quietly bought back from the family that had taken it over and was reopening with my own concept. In 60 days, I made more money consulting than I had made in any single year as the executive chef of Maren & Co. In 90 days, Brent's investors removed him as CEO. In 112 days, the restaurant filed for Chapter 11. In 140 days, I got a phone call from the lead investor, a man I'd had dinner with twice in 5 years, a private equity guy from Greenwich named Philip, asking if I'd be willing to meet. He came to my office. I had an office now, a tiny one on Court Street above a bagel place. He sat across from me in a chair I bought at a flea market and he said, Maren, we want to offer you the restaurant, free and clear. The brand, the lease, the build-out. The LLC will sell you the assets for $1 and walk away. We just want it off our books. I sat with that for a long second. I said, what about Brent? Philip said, Brent will not be involved. Brent will not be near the building. Brent has already signed an NDA and a non-compete that I personally drafted. If you want him at the restaurant, you'll have to fight me for it. And I don't think you want him at the restaurant. I didn't. I said, "What about Olivia?" He said, "Who? That's the part I want you to hold on to. Who?" 8 months earlier, she'd been the woman my husband fired me to make room for. 140 days later, she was a name a 48-year-old private equity guy didn't recognize. I bought the restaurant for $1. I literally wrote a check for $1, and Philip framed it and hung it in his office in Greenwich, which, rich people are weird. I didn't reopen it as Maren & Co. I closed the doors. I gutted the dining room. I stripped out every piece of decor Brent had picked out. The tufted banquettes, the brass accents, the absurd Italian chandelier he'd flown in from Florence that had cost more than my mother's car. I kept the kitchen because the kitchen was mine. I kept the walk-in because the walk-in was mine. I kept the 10-burner Maltony range because I picked it out myself in 2018 from a dealer in New Jersey, and I had cried when it arrived. Then I reopened. 6 months later, under a new name. I called it Halloran. Just my last name. My family's name. The name nobody had been using on the menu, on the signage, on the press materials for the last 4 years, while my husband had quietly built a brand around the version of me that didn't include where I came from. Halloran opened on a Tuesday in March. 46 covers. We turned every table twice. The New York Times came on the second weekend. Pete Wells gave us 2 stars in a review that ran with a photograph of my grandmother's saucepan on the pass. The Michelin Guide reinstated a star 11 months later. Brent moved to Connecticut. He started a consulting firm. It folded inside of a year. The last I heard of him through Manny, who heard from a friend of a friend, he was managing a casual concept in a strip mall outside Hartford. Olivia married a tech guy from Austin and started a wellness brand that sells turmeric powder for $94 a jar. They deserve each other. The divorce was final in April of the following year. I kept the brownstone in Park Slope because I was the one whose name was on the deed. Brent had insisted I be the one to put it in my name for tax reasons back in 2017, which is a sentence I now think about with a great deal of warmth. I sold it 6 months later because I didn't want to live in a place that had her toothbrush in the memory of it. I bought a smaller place in Carroll Gardens. 2 bedrooms, a backyard. A lemon tree that doesn't survive the winters, but I keep trying. My mother came down for the opening of Halloran. She wore a navy dress and stood in the corner of the dining room and cried. My sister Cassie was there. My brother-in-law Sean. Manny, my old sous chef who had quit Maren & Co. the morning after I was fired and had been working as my chef de cuisine ever since. Hank from the pork farm drove 4 hours to be there and brought me a jar of his wife's pickled ramps as an opening gift. There was no big speech. There was no champagne toast. I cooked, the way I always cook, the way I had cooked for 12 years in a kitchen with a man's name above the door. But before service started, I took a moment in the empty dining room. I stood at the chef's counter where my husband had once told me I was being paranoid. I looked around at the room I had paid for, with money I had earned, with food I had cooked, with a name that had always been mine. And I thought about that 15-minute drive up the parking garage ramp. 15 minutes is not long. 15 minutes is how long it takes to plait an amuse-bouche. 15 minutes is how long it takes to drive across Brooklyn at 7:30 on a Tuesday night. 15 minutes is how long my husband, my ex-husband, gave me before he believed his world would keep turning without me in it. What he didn't understand, what he never understood, what 12 years of marriage and 4 years of business and 1 ridiculous mistress in a borrowed chef's coat couldn't teach him, was this: I wasn't the cook, I was the kitchen, I was the suppliers, I was the recipes, I was the systems and the staff and the soul of the place. He thought he could fire me, and the restaurant would keep being the restaurant. He thought that's not your area. It was all my area. It was all my area. It was always all my area. And the thing I want you to know, the thing I tell every young woman who ever writes to me about a husband who started taking calls behind closed doors, who started saying "we" when he means "I." who started introducing her at parties as my wife instead of by her own name. The thing I want you to know is this: the only revenge worth having is the kind that doesn't need him in the room. I don't think about Brent anymore. I don't wonder about Olivia. I don't drive past Smith Street to see whose name is over the door. The door has my name over it. It's been my name the whole time. I cook for 120 people a night now, 6 nights a week, and I close the kitchen on Mondays so I can sit in my backyard and try to keep the lemon tree alive. The saucepan is still on the pass. The 15 minutes are over. I think about that parking garage a lot. Not the 15 minutes themselves, but the years that led up to them. Because the truth is, what Brent did to me on July 14th wasn't a thunderbolt out of a clear sky. It was the harvest of seeds he had been planting for a long time, and the seeds I had been planting too, without knowing it. Every time he said, "That's not your area," and I let it go, that was a seed. Every time I signed a contract without reading it because I trusted him, that was a seed. Every time he took the credit and I told myself it didn't matter because we were a team, that was a seed. He thought he was building an empire on my back. What he was actually building was the leverage I would eventually use to take everything from him. The universe is patient that way. It keeps the books. But here's what I learned and what I want you to take with you. The strength I had on that night in the garage wasn't strength I conjured up in the moment. It was strength I had quietly built across 3 months of reading contracts at 3 in the morning, of calling Hank at the pork farm, of saving copies of recipes to a hard drive in a safety deposit box. Nobody saw me doing any of it. Brent certainly didn't. But integrity is just 1,000 small choices made when nobody is looking, and resilience is just refusing to be erased even after someone has decided you're disposable. The smart thing wasn't the revenge. The smart thing was paying attention. The smart thing was reading every page of every document, even the boring ones, even when I was tired, because something in my gut had told me to. Wisdom isn't a flash of insight. It's the willingness to keep your eyes open when love is asking you to close them. And the moral part, the part I'm still proudest of, is that I never lied. I never stole. I never broke a contract. I just enforced the ones that already existed. Brent fired me believing I was the supporting actress in his story, and I let him discover on his own time that I had been the author of every page. If a younger version of me was sitting across from me right now in the dining room at Halloran, I would tell her this: don't measure your worth by how much someone is willing to give you. Measure it by what you actually built. Sign your own name on things. Read what you sign. Keep a copy. Be loyal, but be loyal to the truth before you're loyal to the person, because people will disappoint you and the truth never will. And when the moment comes, and for some of us it comes, don't waste it on shouting. Walk out the door. Eat your eggs. Let the 15 minutes do what 15 minutes will do. The kitchen is still mine. It was always going to be.